Okay, our next section is going to be more about end-of-life issues. Our Catholic faith values life from what we call the womb to the tomb. But sometimes there are moments when we're asked to make decisions for ourselves or for our loved ones that we may feel challenge our faith. Medical technology has come so far that sometimes we need to take a step back and say, even though we can, should we? We may need to consider the benefits versus the burdens of treatment. And Father Tom will briefly share the Catholic perspectives on this subject.
This is a very broad topic, so I'm going to deviate a little bit and maybe just make a few comments, and then if you have any questions, I'll take the questions, because other than that, we'll probably be here till 3 o'clock in the morning, and I don't intend to stay that long. Also, one of the attendees, this is from St. Myrad's Abbey in Indiana, and it's an example of where you can buy caskets. They make them there. And I'm going to put it up here. They make boxes for the ashes. There's a Trappist monastery in Iowa that also makes caskets at a much cheaper price than you'll get at any place else. Except I also hear Costco sells them, so maybe when you go grocery shopping, you can push your casket out the door along with your fruit and vegetables. But anyway, we're going to talk about the dying process. And the dying process is something that most of us are going to experience in one form or another. Some of us are going to experience it very rapidly. Others, and there's not going to be an awful lot of decisions to be made. Others of us will not have the good luck or good fortune at times to pass on quickly and painlessly. And this, just before I came here, I was at the Tranquility Hospice over behind Kennestone Hospital, and to me, a hospice program is just a wonderful service to both the person dying and the family. And the hard part, I think, at times for the family is to realize when it's time to let go, and to realize that, for the good of the person, the good of everybody, hospice is the route to go. In my experience over the years, people say, well, we're going to take care of them to the end. And that's admirable if it can happen. And it's admirable also if it's good for it to happen. Sometimes the care that the individual who is dying, either their spouse, relative, or friend, requires so much care that it can be cruel and unusual punishment on our part to say that we're going to keep them there. And it becomes for our benefit, basically, and perhaps not for the benefit of the person we're taking care of. Just a couple years ago, in one case, the family decided that though recommended for resident hospice, their mother and wife were severely ill, very close to death. And they just could not make that break. So they decided to do home hospice. And basically it almost killed all of them. And it was just more than that they could take on, but they couldn't make that decision to let go. And it's difficult. It's very difficult. And many of the hospitals now have palliative care, people who will meet with you, discuss things with you. I know a couple years back, Father Leo Cummings, some of you might remember him, he was stationed here at St. Anne's, and then from here went to St. Thomas in Smyrna, sort of in semi-retirement. And he became very ill. Now, I don't know when he ever asked me or told me, but I didn't remember. Probably walking down the corridor, he probably said to me, will you be my durable power of attorney for health issues? So he was in the hospital. I didn't realize I was until finally they found the document that I was the person that was in charge of the health decisions. And by the time I got into the process, he was in very bad shape. And he was in intensive care. And they continued to run all kinds of tests on him. And with a period of probably 3 months to 4 months, he was in 4 different convalescent homes. And so finally I said to the doctor, I said, he's not a ping pong ball. And the doctor said, well, we want to do a test on his cognitive abilities. Well, clearly, I'm not a doctor, but it was very clear that his cognitive abilities were very limited. So I said to the doctor, and plus he had a tremendous bed sore that continued to get infected. He'd go to a convalescent home, get infected again, come back to the hospital. They would pump him up with antibiotics, ship him back out to another convalescent home, and that cycle was continuing to go on. So the doctor said to me, he said, what do you care if we do a cognitive test on him or not? I said, because I don't think it's necessary. And he said, well, you're not paying for it. So I said to him, are you doing it for free? And he said, no. So I said, then someone's paying for it. And that's what happens, I think, within sometime our own medical field. That I'm not saying it's a scam or anything. I'm just saying that the doctors like us have a hard time letting go. And what we used to call do not resuscitate, they now call allow natural death. Allow the person to die naturally. And that's a decision that at times is very difficult to make. And I think some of the major questions, and so you could ask concerns that you might have, revolve around hydration and food, nutrition. And then also, when is it that you say that the person should be allowed to die naturally? And when should you take away, the continuing treatment to make that person well again? And basically what it comes down to is that when the treatment will no longer render the person cured or well again. In other words, the treatment is doing absolutely nothing for the person, but perhaps prolonging a life that should be allowed to end naturally. And consequently, we talk about, we have to give the person nutrition to the very end. Well, sometimes, we're doing that person more harm. For instance, feeding tubes. It's a very debated issue. But when it comes to the point that that feeding tube is offering nothing for the recovery of that person, but at times it actually could jeopardize and bring about more pain to the person, because in today's world, that infections are rampant in hospitals, and that feeding tube is a place that is a breeding ground for germs. But again, it's hard to let go and say, I'm not going to feed my mother or my father, even though feeding them is doing them no good and perhaps some harm. The example of Father Leo is where I learned I didn't know much about the process of dying. I've known a lot of people in my life that have died, my parents included. My mother died very suddenly, and my father died of a slow death of Alzheimer's, but it was an untreatable thing, just a process of his fading away eventually. But Father Leo didn't have that break. And I said to the nurse, I said, well, aren't we going to continue to give him water? And she said, no. So I said, don't you think that's a little drastic? And she explained to me something I didn't know. Believe it or not, there is something I didn't know. That is that at times when we insist on giving the person liquids, the body has broken down to the point it can no longer process, either food or liquids. But yet, if we continue to give that person liquids, it's got to go someplace. And that's why oftentimes when you see someone who's in the last stages of dying, they're bloated. That's because if you continue to give that person liquids, from what my understanding, and again, I'm not a nurse or a doctor, but from what the nurse told me, that liquid tends to get under the skin, collect under the skin, and that's why the person begins to swell. It has no way of processing it other than storing it wherever they can find, the body can find a place to store it. So I think one of the, we have to, go about, and it's, again, I keep saying it's difficult because it is, but we have to keep our heads about it when we begin to look at our loved ones in their final days. And this might sound a little crude, I don't mean it that way. We are not taxidermists. We're not setting about to keep that person present to us because of our need to have that person around. But rather, our responsibility is to see that the quality of that person's life is as good as possible in their final days. And again, to know that point of time when we have to allow to let that person die naturally. I don't know if that, and it's a complex question. There's a lot of ifs, ands, and buts. There's, things that deal with certain types of illnesses and certain medical situations that probably aren't things that we're going to run across that often in our lives, and probably some of us will never run into. But other things that are, everyday issues. Today, as I said, I was at the hospice, and this came out very quickly. The woman was diagnosed less than a month ago, 3 weeks ago, with stage 4 cancer in her stomach. And there's nothing they could do. And she asked the family to allow her to die naturally. And that's what they opted to do. And that's very different than euthanasia. Euthanasia is when that person is able to be treated and they want to end their lives for one reason or other, and they ask you to assist them in ending their lives. That's not a question of allowing the person to die naturally. So I think there's a very, very big difference between the two. And again, allowing the person to die naturally is not euthanasia. It's letting nature and God take its course. And us accepting the fact and readying ourselves for the fact that that person is going to move on to another place in their lives. Okay? Does anybody have any specific questions that you might be wondering about? I used to say when I was provincial that if it came to the point where they had to pull the plug, they would have raffled off to see who was going to get the chance to pull it. So, it didn't happen, thank God. Okay. Okay.
Wait a minute. I'm going to get my exercise tonight. Would you speak in the microphone?
No. Regarding cremation, you mentioned that the Catholic Church does permit that now. And the question I have is, okay, when the cremation is complete, is there a special section in the cemeteries that are like for husband and wife, next to each other, and they bury?
Yes, there are. Yeah.
Now, is that just the Canton one, or
no? Arlington has them.
All cemeteries have an area, whether it be a wall, some have benches. Arlington, Green Lawn, just about all of them have what they place niches for cremains.
Also, you can put the ashes over the body. Say, for instance, if a spouse was buried, the body was buried, and the other spouse dies and is cremated, I'm pretty sure you can put those right in that same grave.
Yeah, my grandmother was cremated, and her cremains are next to my grandfather, who, 30 years ago, was not cremated. So they had their plot, and grandma's right next to granddad, but one was full body casket, the other one was cremains. If you have any specific question for Father Tom, we're going to, about end-of-life decisions as far as care and the Catholic perspectives, if we could ask those today, right now, and then if you have a specific question about funeral planning and the other topics, we'll get them later. Anyone have a specific question for Father Tom? Yes, I'm coming.
Organ donation, I know we can do that,
Right.
and it obviously has to be done immediately.
Right.
There is no difficulty with that,
No.
is there?
When my mother died, she died, as said, she died very rapidly, very quickly, and we donated the retinas of her eyes to the eye bank, and they took those immediately, right after we brought it. She went to the emergency room, and I was there with my brother, and they asked us, so we said, go ahead and do it right away. And also, in my experience in donating your body for science, that's acceptable. And what usually happens in that case is that there's a card that you carry in your wallet. Same with the organ donor, but this is a little more, important. And a lot of times people do it because they have a rare disease or something very unusual, but also other people do it just for the medical schools to have a cadaver to work on. And then they take that body immediately. And then ordinarily it's probably could be you could have a memorial mass right away, or sometime they wait until the body is returned or the ashes are returned, and then you would have a funeral mass. That could be quite a long time, 6 months or so. So that's permissible. Yes?
Wait a minute. I'll come. Wait a minute.
The dehydration and the nutrition question.
Right.
How do you know?
How do you know when it's
And,
yeah.
and if you're going to donate organs, how does that affect that?
That's a good question. Very good. We had a case of that last year. A young man died very suddenly. Well, he didn't die, but he was dead, but they put him on a respirator. And it came to the point of taking him off the respirator. And he had made it known to his wife that he wanted, to be an organ donor. And I was there at the meeting at the North Fulton Hospital with the family when the doctor came in would do the retrieve the organs. And again, like Mickey said, there was a little bit of a controversy. His brothers didn't want it done, but he had made it perfectly clear to his wife that he wanted it done, which meant that they could not wait past a certain amount of time to take the organs. And so she made the decision to move immediately and remove him from the respirator and to get the organs.
But he was deemed, Father Tom, it's Linda. Father Tom, it's
Pardon?
Linda, over here. But he was deemed that his brain function
he
was
was
gone.
brain dead, yeah.
Right. I mean, he was
They were
he's
just
clinically dead. Yes.
They were keeping him alive specifically because of the question
because of the organs.
Of the organs.
Right. Yeah, you have.
There are many issues in the Catholic Church and other congregations, and we have issues with pro-life when life begins, and now we're working with death decisions. And the question is, we know about when life begins, when that heart beats, but I have many friends of mine, probably mostly doctors and surgeons, and many of them are Catholic. And I ask them, about flu shots, and I ask them about what they would do about harvesting organs. And a majority of them say they would not. You're not getting a surgeon harvesting organs from the body. Nobody quite knows when death really ends, and it doesn't end upon someone's breathing stop or cease of breathing.
Right.
They don't you hold a mirror like they used to do in some of the old movies.
Right.
To see if they're alive or dead.
That's very true.
So it's really an issue, and I would not want to be having my eyes or whatever harvested when I may not really be dead. but be thinking about
Oh,
what
no,
is
no, you
happening.
have to be dead.
No, that's true now. You're not getting surgeons. My father was an undertaker.
Yeah.
So it's a real issue. There could be life, could be thoughts there when they're harvesting. You're getting young kids, they're not even in med school, taking out organs.
Yeah, no, that's
Well,
not what I'm talking about. I mean, there could be, people that don't live up to their
it's food for thought.
responsibilities. But I think the general purpose or the general rule would be that the person would have to be clinically dead.
I believe, Father Tom, that the young surgeons do not make the decision. They are following someone else's directive. So I think that probably is
Yeah.
a non-issue.
I know this particular case they had last year, there was a doctor that was her main responsibility, her main specialty. And it was I thought she did a very thorough job in explaining the situation to the family. And the person, it was the person's wish. And he definitely was only being kept on the respirator for the sake of harvesting the organs, not because there was any chance that he would come back to life. Go ahead.
Wait. Can you?
For the donating of your body to science, is there something specific for
Right.
that?
Well, to donate to science is a little more complicated than to donate organs. Donate organs you can do through your driver's license. But the other way, you'd have to get a specific place who is going to accept that body, like whether if you had it done here, whether it would go to Emory or to wherever,
Usually those arrangements are made in advance with the institution
way
you
in
want to
advance,
donate your
yeah.
body to. Right, and the next of kin will follow through. And that, again, it's communication with your spouse or your loved one who knows what your wishes are, and you have the documents already prepared for you to make that donation when the time comes.
And oftentimes, too, it depends. If the person has a serious illness, and oftentimes they're going. The case I had in Massachusetts, the gentleman who donated his body to science had been sick for a number of years, and the disease that he was suffering from was that his organs were aging faster than that he was aging. They were that of a 90-year-old man. But he had been in and out of the hospital so many times over the years that it was pretty common knowledge among the staff that he was going to donate his body. And I was there when he died, and he had it in his wallet. They opened the wallet, and the card was there. There was the number to call, and it went from there. Yep, Bob.
Under what circumstances would the church permit a person to choose end of life? In other words, under conditions of like chronic incurable pain or incurable disease, or are there some guidelines?
Yeah, I think the rule of thumb is that there's no treatment for the illness that is going to make the patient improve. In other words, I guess another way they might say, there's nothing more we can do for you.
But also remember, even though medicine can't cure it, there is still treatment. That's where hospice and palliative care comes in. You can control pain. You can help that person be comfortable through that end-of-life stage,
Right.
even though there's no medical cure for it.
And that's the whole thing of allowing, natural death, is to keep the person comfortable and minimize the pain to the best of your ability and let the process take its course.
The other thing to remember too is when we talk about allowing natural death, the disease process itself, the process of dying has already begun. It's not I'm going to choose to die, so I'm not going to take food or water. Generally speaking, when we talk about allowing natural death, it means that the process of dying has already
No, that's right.
whatever. It's that the disease has progressed to a point where dying has begun. Does that make sense?
That's what it's all about. Okay?
Yes, Father, the acoustics, as we all know, is bad here, so I heard something before, and I just want to get a clarification. She said something about renting a casket and having a mass and then cremation.
Right.
And she gave the impression that you couldn't have a mass with remains, and you must have the body
No.
there.
That's not true. The
Okay.
preferred way, if everybody's going to be happy in the church, what you would do, rent a casket, bring the body to the church, have the funeral, then have the cremation.
Okay.
Now, in the case of the monastery, they call it a green burial. I've had one of those here, and they rent the casket, and then the casket goes back to the funeral home. The person's put on a slab and covered with a quilt or something, a shroud, and brought to the monastery. The idea is to be buried very similar to how the Trappist monks are buried. There's no embalming, there's no casket or any of that stuff.
Thank you.
Yes, it is.
The difference is that when a funeral mass takes place with the ashes, okay, the ashes are brought in. I'm sorry if I confused you. The ashes are brought in. They are placed usually on a table up at the front, in front of the altar, and mass proceeds as normal. The things that do not happen, okay, the funeral pall is not placed because there is no casket. The ashes are blessed with holy water, but then there's no incensing and final commendation. So we have many funeral masses where just ashes are present. What I was alluding to or saying was that the church prefers that the body be present for the fullness of the funeral liturgy and then cremation take place afterwards. However, if cremation takes place first, the cremains are permitted to be present for the funeral mass.
They're right here.
Okay.
That doesn't mean you're not going to, go ahead, you could come across a priest that's going to do it wrong, so.
If you're cremated and you want your ashes to be, like, say, put in the water, does it have to be in a container, or can
Yeah.
you just sprinkle the
Yeah,
ashes?
they really they really are not in favor of sprinkling or, throwing the ashes into the sea. The idea is that you bury the body.
Thank you.
Okay. Nowadays, I don't know if you've seen it or not, but some of the funeral homes have an array of jewelry, bracelets, rings, and brooches that you can have the ashes of your loved one put inside with a little glass window, and you can see the ashes. That to me is probably over the top a little bit, but.
If there's any other questions about funerals, if we could hold those so we can move on, and then we'll have question and answers for all of the topics. Does
one
anyone
last
have a question specifically for Father Tom?
Les.
I was told that if you were cremated and you rented a casket, you could be brought in a casket with your remains inside.
Well, I'm sure you could be, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.